Sign it before dessert, she said, sliding a 14-page post-nuptial agreement toward me while everyone at that table sat there like I was already erased, like I came from nothing and deserved nothing. But what they didn't know, what none of them ever bothered to ask, was that the small company they dismissed sits under a $2.1 billion parent, that I quietly hold the $12 million debt tied to their properties, and that 6 days before this dinner, I had already sent everything to the SEC. So when those black SUVs turned into the driveway 20 minutes later, that wasn't a coincidence. That was the moment their control ended and my revenge began. And my name is Claire, the woman they thought they could rewrite, right up until the night their empire started collapsing in real time. Chapter 1. I remember the smell of red wine before I remember the words. It was the kind of deep, expensive Cabernet that lingered in the air, mixing with butter and roasted herbs, the kind of scent that made everything feel deliberate. The Holloway dining room always felt like that. Nothing casual, nothing accidental. Even the light seemed staged, warm and golden, falling across polished crystal and white linen like it had been rehearsed. Every fork was placed at the same angle, every glass aligned, every movement quiet and controlled. It was never just dinner in that house. It was presentation. I had learned that over the past 3 years, sitting at that table as Daniel's wife, watching, adapting, saying just enough, never too much. But that night, something felt off. Not louder, not colder, just too smooth. Like a scene that had already been practiced before I walked into it. Margaret Holloway didn't wait for conversation to settle. She didn't ask about my day or comment on the meal. As soon as the main course was set down, she reached beside her plate and slid a folder across the table toward me. It stopped just short of my glass. Sign it before dessert, Althea. It's better for everyone. Her voice was calm, polished, final. I looked down without touching it. Post-nuptial agreement. The words sat there in clean, sharp print, as if they belonged in an office, not between a plate of steak and a glass of wine. For a second, I didn't move. Not because I didn't understand what it was, but because I understood exactly what it was. This wasn't paperwork. This was pressure. No notice, no discussion, no attorney sitting beside me to explain anything, just a document placed in front of me under perfect lighting, surrounded by people who expected me to comply. I felt Daniel shift slightly beside me. Not toward me, just enough to let me know he was aware of what was happening. "It's just a formality," he said quietly. I turned my head and looked at him. He didn't meet my eyes right away. Formality. That word landed heavier than anything Margaret had said. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of shared space, shared promises, and suddenly it was a formality to redefine all of it. I finally reached forward and opened the folder. There were multiple copies. Not one, not even two. 3 identical sets, neatly clipped as if they expected hesitation and had prepared for it. That's when the first crack showed. This wasn't spontaneous. This had been arranged in advance, printed, reviewed, timed. I flipped through the first few pages slowly. Asset protection clauses, separation of property, limitations that would leave me with almost nothing if the marriage ended. It was thorough. Too thorough for something they expected me to sign between courses. I could feel their eyes on me. Not curious, not concerned, measuring, waiting. I didn't look up right away. I let the silence stretch just enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I closed the folder gently and rested my hand on top of it. "I have a question," I said. My voice came out softer than I expected, but steady. That alone shifted something. Margaret's fingers paused against her glass. Daniel exhaled quietly. Across the table, his father leaned back just slightly, like he was bracing for something inconvenient. I looked at Daniel first. Did you have your own counsel review this before you signed anything like this? He didn't answer. Not immediately. His jaw tightened, just a fraction, and then he reached for his wine. That was answer enough. I turned my gaze to Margaret. And was I supposed to have mine here tonight, or was I just expected to agree? The room didn't explode. That would have been easier. Instead, it shifted in smaller ways, the kind that told you everything you needed to know. Margaret set her glass down with care. This is standard, Althea. Families like ours take precautions. Families like ours. The word slid across the table and stopped in front of me like another document. I held her gaze. I'm aware of how these agreements work, which is why I'm asking why it's being presented like this. No one rushed to answer. No one reassured me. Because reassurance wasn't part of the plan. Control was. Daniel finally spoke again. Quieter this time. It's not a big deal. We just want to avoid complications later. We. That word settled in beside formality. I felt something inside me go very still. Not hurt. Not anger. Clarity. They weren't talking to me. They were talking around me, through me, as if I were already an issue to manage, a variable to contain. I let my fingers rest lightly against the edge of the folder. I'm not signing anything tonight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push the document away. I just said it. Simple. Clean. Margaret's expression didn't change, but I saw it in her eyes, that small flicker of resistance she hadn't accounted for. You're overreacting, Daniel said. I turned to him again. No, I said quietly. I'm responding. Silence settled over the table again, heavier this time, not because I had refused, but because I had refused without breaking. I picked up my glass and took a small sip of wine, letting the bitterness sit on my tongue. They had built this entire moment around the assumption that I would fold, that I would feel outnumbered, pressured, grateful enough to comply. What they hadn't considered was the possibility that I understood exactly what they were doing, or that I had already started paying attention long before tonight. I looked down at the contract one more time. Then I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. Not hard, just enough. They're trying to protect their assets, I said, almost to myself. Then I looked up. They have no idea mine are bigger. No one laughed. No one asked what I meant, because for the first time that night, something in the room didn't feel controlled. Margaret studied me more carefully now. Daniel finally met my eyes. And in that brief, quiet moment, I saw it. Not understanding. Not yet. Just uncertainty. I set my napkin down beside my plate. Dinner wasn't over, but something else had already shifted into place. They thought they were testing me. They didn't realize they had already failed. Chapter 2. Margaret's patience snapped in a way she could not fully disguise. Her voice lost its warmth, flattening into something colder, something closer to the truth she had been holding back all evening. You came into this family with nothing. We are simply protecting what is ours. Nothing. The word did not just land, it cut. Not because it was new, but because it was finally spoken without polish. I let it sit there between us, heavy and undeniable. Because this was not a moment, it was a pattern. I had seen it in every dinner, every quiet gathering, every small comment disguised as curiosity. Victoria asking what I did, then turning away before I finished. Preston joking about people who married into money, always with that faint smirk that never quite reached his eyes. Margaret correcting me, subtly, constantly, always just enough to remind me I was being measured. And Daniel, sitting beside me through all of it, watching, saying nothing. I used to think silence was neutrality. It is not. Silence is agreement. I folded my hands calmly, even as something sharper settled beneath my ribs. If that is what you believe, I said, then this should have been handled through counsel, not over dinner. Margaret's eyes hardened. This is not a negotiation, it is a safeguard. Against what? The question came out softer than I intended, but it held. She did not hesitate. Against uncertainty. Across the table, Preston let out a quiet laugh. You should be grateful we even let you sit at this table, he said. There it was, the line they had all been circling, the one that stripped everything down to its core. I turned my head and looked at him fully. Grateful? For a seat? For permission? For proximity? Something inside me went very still. I gave up my own firm to move here, I said quietly. Not because I had nothing, because I chose him. Daniel shifted beside me, and then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. That was the moment. Not the contract, not Margaret's words. That. The smallest movement, the clearest answer. He had already chosen. You are making this into something it is not, he said. I looked at him. No, I said. I am finally seeing it for what it is. I reached forward and turned another page of the contract, letting the silence build around the sound of paper. No independent counsel. I glanced up briefly. Presented in a controlled setting. I flipped another page. Expectation of immediate signature. I closed the folder. Do you really believe this would stand in court? Howard spoke then, his voice steady, deliberate. If you do not sign, we will proceed with annulment. Fraudulent misrepresentation is not something we tolerate. Fraud. The word almost made me smile, not because it was absurd, because it was calculated. You think pressure creates compliance, I said. It does not create enforceability. Preston leaned forward slightly, his tone sharpening. Are you a lawyer now? I met his gaze. No, just someone who reads before signing. That landed harder than anything else I had said, because it broke the role they had already assigned me. Margaret leaned in, her voice lower now, more controlled, more dangerous. We are offering you clarity that is more than most people in your position receive. My position? Defined by them, limited by them. I tilted my head slightly. And what position do you think that is? She did not answer, because the answer would have exposed too much. Howard exhaled slowly. We are trying to avoid complications. I nodded once. So am I. The room shifted again, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. They thought this was where they drew the line. They had no idea this was where I started remembering everything. Daniel's voice cut through, tighter now. Why are you doing this? I looked at him for a long moment. Because you already did. He frowned. What does that even mean? It means you made your decision before I sat down at this table. Silence. Real this time. No one rushed to fill it, no one softened it. Because there was nothing to soften. Daniel did not deny it. He did not argue. He did not reach for me. And that absence said more than anything he could have said. I leaned back slightly in my chair, creating just enough distance to breathe. You think this is about money, I said quietly. Margaret's eyes narrowed. It is always about money. No, I shook my head once. It is about control. No one interrupted, because they knew it was true. Preston's expression shifted now, the amusement gone. Victoria watched me more carefully. Howard remained still, but his attention sharpened. And Daniel finally looked at me like he didn't recognize me, not as his wife, not as someone familiar, but as something unpredictable, something he had underestimated. I rested my hand lightly on the contract one last time, then slid it back across the table. "I am not signing this," I said. "Not tonight, not like this." Margaret's voice came out sharper now. "Then understand the consequences." I held her gaze. "I already do." Another pause. Longer this time. Heavier. Because the balance had shifted. Not fully, not yet, but enough for them to feel it. I picked up my glass, letting the silence stretch just a little further. Then I set it down, carefully, deliberately. This was not the moment everything broke. It was the moment everything became visible. 3 years of small cuts, 3 years of quiet adjustments, 3 years of pretending I did not see what was happening. That ended here. And somewhere beneath the tension, beneath the polished surface of that table, something else settled into place. They thought this was where they drew the line. They had no idea this was where I started remembering everything. Chapter 3. No one touched their food again. The room felt different now, not controlled, not carefully arranged, just suspended in a way that made every small movement matter. I let the contract rest where it was and drew my hand back slowly. "Before I sign anything, I have a question." Margaret's eyes fixed on me, sharp, watching for any shift she could still control. "What question?" I did not look at her. I turned my attention across the table instead, to Preston. He was already watching me, but there was something new in his expression now, something tighter, something less certain. I held his gaze. "Your last quarter positions were aggressive." A crease formed between his brows. "I have no idea what you think you are talking about." I leaned back slightly, keeping my tone even. "Especially the ones you moved right before the announcement." He did not answer. Not right away. Just a second. But it was too long. Victoria turned toward him. "Preston?" He shifted in his seat, his voice coming out sharper. "You are reaching." I did not respond to him. I turned instead to Daniel. "You knew." It was not a question. His expression changed just enough. Not surprise, recognition, and something else beneath it, something closer to discomfort. Daniel's voice dropped. "You never told me that." I held his gaze. "You never asked." That landed harder than anything else I had said, because it was true, because it exposed something he could not deflect. The memory came back clearly. Late nights, quiet rooms, spreadsheets open across my screen, numbers that did not sit right, trades that landed just ahead of movement, patterns that repeated just enough to matter. I had flagged it once, carefully. He had glanced at it, then set it aside. "It's probably nothing." Probably. I had not pushed. I had watched. Back at the table, I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I spoke again. "That position alone moved 8 figures in less than 48 hours. Preston's eyes flickered. There it was. Not denial, calculation. Victoria's phone was already in her hand, her thumb moving quickly. "Wait," she murmured. Preston reached for his phone next, his movements less controlled now. "This does not prove anything," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. I tilted my head slightly. I did not say it did. Margaret's voice cut in, controlled but thinner now. "This is not relevant." I looked at her. "It becomes relevant when fraud is mentioned." Howard leaned forward slightly, his attention fully engaged now. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting you verify what you think you already understand." The room shifted again, not dramatically, but enough for them to feel it. I let my gaze return to Preston. "You should check Ardent Systems before deciding what I misrepresented." The name landed differently this time. Not vague, not casual, specific. Victoria stopped scrolling for a second. Then her expression changed. Ardent Systems is not a small position, she said slowly. Preston's jaw tightened as he kept reading. It's layered, she added, through multiple holding structures. Howard's voice was quieter now. Under whose control? Victoria hesitated, her eyes lifted toward me. I did not answer right away. I let the silence settle, let it stretch just enough to make them feel the gap, the same kind of gap they had expected me to fall into earlier. Now it belonged to them. Daniel's voice came again, softer, uncertain. What is Ardent Systems? I looked at him. For a moment, I almost answered directly. Then I chose not to. You should check who controls it. Not the name, the structure. That shifted something again. Preston leaned forward, his tone sharper. Are you trying to threaten us? I met his gaze. If I were, you would not have to ask. Margaret's voice came quietly, almost to herself. This is tied to a private structure. She swallowed slightly. And it's not listed under any of the names we know. Margaret did not move, but I saw it in her eyes. The recalculation, the adjustment, the first real sign that control had slipped. Howard remained still, but his attention had narrowed, focused, careful. Daniel did not look away from me now, not once. You were worried about what I might take from you, I said, my voice calm. I let the words sit for a moment. You never stopped to think about what you already overlooked. No one interrupted, because now they were listening, not to dismiss, not to correct, but to understand. I leaned back slightly, creating just enough distance to breathe. Then I spoke again. For 3 years, you have been very confident about what I am. I paused. And what I'm not. Preston's expression shifted, the confidence gone now. Victoria lowered her phone slowly. Howard said nothing, but I could see the calculations moving behind his eyes. Margaret watched me carefully, no longer evaluating, now reassessing. Daniel looked at me like he was trying to piece something together that had been in front of him the entire time. I let my hand rest lightly against the table. I did not reach for the contract again. I did not need to. The conversation had already moved past it. They thought they understood the situation. They thought they had identified the risk. They thought they were controlling the outcome. They missed something fundamental. I watched their faces carefully, not just doubt, not just confusion, the exact moment they realized they had been negotiating from the wrong side of the table. I let the silence stretch one last time. Then I spoke now, softer. They were protecting what they built, I said. I met Margaret's gaze. They never considered what I had built before them. No one moved, no one spoke. Because for the first time that night, they were no longer deciding my place at their table. They were trying to figure out if they still had one in mine. Chapter 4. The first thing that changed was not the number, it was the silence. Forks stopped halfway, glasses hovered in the air like no one quite remembered what they were doing with their hands. I could see it in their faces before anyone said a word. Not just confusion, something heavier. The moment doubt starts replacing certainty. Victoria was the first to look up. What is this? Her voice sounded thinner than usual, like it did not belong to her. Preston leaned forward, squinting at the screen again. That's not accurate, he said. There's no way this is tight to you. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The number sat there. 2.1 billion. Clean, verified, unarguable. Veller Systems. Founder. My name. Margaret turned to me slowly. Why didn't you say anything? I did, I said. You just never listened. Howard cleared his throat. Let's not jump to conclusions. Wealth doesn't mean control. Meridian Capital, I said. Preston looked at him. That's your line. Howard stayed still. $12.4 million, renewed in 2022. Victoria frowned. What does that mean? It means you've been negotiating from borrowed leverage. Preston pushed his chair back. You're implying you control Meridian? I'm not implying anything. You expect us to believe you've been sitting on this the whole time? I wasn't sitting, I was watching. That landed harder. Daniel spoke quietly. You flagged something months ago. I forwarded concerns, I said. Preston turned. You did what? I noticed patterns. Victoria's voice tightened. Are you saying there's an investigation? Then something shifted again. Not inside the room, outside. A faint glow moved across the glass wall. Headlights, slow and deliberate, cutting through the dark like they had somewhere specific to be. No one spoke this time, but I could feel it. The attention pulling away from the table, drifting toward the reflection. The engine didn't shut off right away. It idled. Low, steady, uncomfortable. Preston glanced at the window, then back at me, like he was trying to decide which version of reality to hold on to. What did you do? He asked, quieter now. I didn't answer. The engine finally went silent. A door opened. Soft, controlled. Footsteps followed, measured, unhurried, each one closing the distance between assumption and consequence. Victoria whispered, Who is that? Howard didn't answer. Preston shook his head. No, this isn't happening. The front door opened. Daniel looked at me. You set this up? No, I said. I noticed. The man entered. Mr. Callahan, we need to discuss discrepancies tied to your accounts. Preston stepped forward. There must be a mistake. We can clear this up right now. The man didn't look at him. This is no longer a clarification process. Preston froze. I'm the one who manages these accounts, he said, louder now. You need to speak with me. Nothing. Not even a glance. The man kept his eyes on Howard. Sir, we'll need you to come with us. That was the moment it broke. Preston stood there, mid-sentence, suddenly irrelevant in his own room. Victoria looked away. Margaret lowered her gaze. Daniel said nothing. Howard exhaled slowly. Preston laughed once, sharp and empty. You're just going to ignore me? No one answered. Not them, not even the room. I watched it happen. The exact second he realized control had moved past him, he turned to me. You knew, he said. I saw enough. You let this happen. You were already making it happen. Daniel stepped closer. You could have told me. I looked at him longer this time. I tried. You just needed it to be comfortable enough to ignore. His expression shifted. That one line landed deeper than anything else I could have said. This didn't have to go this far. It already had. Victoria spoke, almost desperate now. What do you want? It's not about what I want. It's about what's already in motion. Howard's voice dropped. You positioned yourself against us? No, I said. You positioned yourselves. Preston ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. We can fix this. We still have options. You had options. Silence settled again. Daniel looked at me, softer now. So that's it? I said, you saw it too. You just chose comfort. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Because he knew. And in that moment, whatever we had left quietly ended. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down. No one spoke. No one tried to stop me when I stood. I looked at them one last time. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just clarity. You didn't lose me tonight. You just finally realized you were never in control to begin with. Then I turned and walked out. Behind me, no one followed.
Chapter 5. The air outside felt quieter than it should have, like something heavy had just been set down behind me and the world had not caught up yet. I stood there for a second on the front steps, not thinking, not rushing, just letting the silence settle into something real. No one came after me. No voice called my name. No last attempt to pull me back into a conversation that had already ended. I walked down the path without looking back. Inside that house, everything had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that nothing would ever fit the same way again. Preston would still be talking, trying to take control of a situation that no longer recognized him. He would repeat himself, push farther, raise his voice, but it would not land the way it used to. It would hang in the air and fall flat. He had spent years believing control meant being heard. Tonight, he learned it meant being acknowledged, and no one was looking at him anymore. Howard would be quieter, still, watching the pieces move around him, trying to calculate what was left that he could still influence. But this was not something he could redirect. This was something already in motion. Margaret would sit there, hands folded, searching for a way to explain what just happened in a way that still made sense to her. There was none. And Daniel. I slowed at the edge of the driveway, just for a second. Daniel would still be standing there, not because he did not know what to do, but because he finally understood that nothing he did now would change the outcome. 3 years. That was how long I had given him to see me clearly. 3 years of watching him choose what was easier, what was quieter, what did not disrupt the structure he trusted. He had seen enough. He just never chose differently. I reached my car and rested my hand on the door, the cool surface grounding me. It had never been about proving anything. It had been about whether anyone in that room would recognize what was right in front of them. They did not. Not until it was too late to matter. I got in and closed the door softly behind me. For a moment, I did not start the engine. I just sat there, letting the quiet hold. My phone buzzed once. I looked down. A message confirming what had already been set in motion. Review procedures, documentation, the beginning of consequences that would not be negotiated away. Preston would be pulled into it whether he understood it or not. Howard would have to answer for things he had always directed from a distance. The structure they relied on would not hold under scrutiny. Not this time. I locked the screen and set the phone aside. Karma was never about destruction. It was about sequence. Every decision, every dismissal, every moment they chose not to see what was in front of them, leading here. I started the engine and pulled out slowly. The house faded behind me without resistance. No one stopped me, no one tried, because there was nothing left to take from me. At the end of the street, I paused, then turned, the road opening ahead in a way it had not before. For the first time that night, nothing in front of me had already been decided. My phone buzzed again. I did not need to check to know it was Daniel. It rang once, then stopped. A message followed. "Can we talk?" I looked at it for a long moment. 3 years, and now he wanted to talk. I could almost hear the way he would say it, careful, measured, trying to find a version of this that still left something intact. There was nothing left to repair. I typed a response, paused, then erased it. There are moments where silence says more than anything you could explain. This was one of them. I set the phone down without replying and kept driving. The city lights stretched ahead, steady and indifferent, the rhythm of everything continuing without needing permission from what had just ended. That was the difference. I was no longer part of something that required me to wait. A red light stopped me, the glow settling across the dashboard as I rested my hands on the wheel. No anger, no urgency, just clarity. Preston would remember the moment he spoke and no one answered. Howard would remember the moment he realized control was never as complete as he believed. Margaret would remember the silence after the questions stopped making sense. And Daniel would remember the moment he understood that seeing something and choosing it are not the same. He had done one, he had not done the other. The light turned green. I moved forward. Not quickly, not slowly, just steadily. The distance between me and that house grew with every second, and with it, the weight of everything I had carried there. I never hid. They just never looked. If you've ever been in a room where everything feels decided before you even speak, you know what that silence feels like. The pressure to agree, to stay, to fit into something that was never built for you. I didn't, and everything changed because of that. So if you find yourself there one day, sitting across from people who think they already understand your place, ask yourself this: would you sign just to keep the peace? Or would you walk away and knowing exactly what it costs? Because the truth is simple. They did not lose me. They lost the only person who never needed anything from them. If you value stories where strength is quiet but unshakable, subscribe.